wilderness. They're like out of place. And yet God used that. With persecution in Europe, more Jewish people started coming back. Then there happened to be, in France, a Jewish journalist, writer, critic from Vienna, who was covering a story, what was called the Dreyfus Affair, where a Jewish soldier in France was put on trial, falsely accused in a wave of anti-Semitism. And this writer, this Viennese Jewish writer, he always believed that the way to get by was to assimilate, and his idea was, I'm going to be just like everybody else. I'm not going to be as Jewish. And he believed that the future of the Jewish people was to assimilate, stop being Jewish. And he tried. But as he watched the crowds outside the trial, or when he was writing the story, he heard them chanting, "Death to the Jews, death to the Jews." And he's thinking, this is France. And they're saying, "Death to the Jews." His life changed. He had a vision that the future of the Jewish people was in their own ancient land. It had to become a nation again. That's the only way. His name was Theodor Herzl. Theodor means gift of God. Herzl. Herzl wrote a book about this called The Jewish State. And he wrote another one called The Old New Land. And he started a movement. It was about a nation. It was about a nation that would exist again, even though it didn't exist. It was all a dream. About the return to Zion. And so they called the movement, it was about the returning to Zion, and they called the movement Zionism, meaning to return to Zion. Now the amazing thing is, he was not religious at all, and most of those early people were not religious. The people who were used to do this weren't doing it to try to fulfill any prophecy. God said he would do it. So it's amazing, it's even more amazing that he used people who didn't even know what they were doing regarding God. Mark Twain had said, "Israel is a dream." Herzl had a quote said, "If you will it, it is no dream." He campaigned all over Europe to try to make that dream come true. He convened a Congress, and he to the rebuilding of the nation. There was no nation, but he said, let's all gather as if there were a nation. It was kind of like by faith. And they dressed up. He said, dress up as diplomats, dress up as if there really is a nation. Be like ambassadors. So they all did, even though there was no nation. They put together a flag. This is 50 years before the nation. Put together a flag with no nation. And they chose the flag. They chose to take the Hebrew prayer cloth, the ancient cloth, which is white with blue on it. That's why the flag of Israel is white with blue, because it's the prayer cloth is what it is. Interesting, because in the Bible it says you will wear it says you'll wear fringes, and it gives a blue dye it speaks of. Now, that blue dye was there in ancient times, but it disappeared. Nobody could find it until modern times. We found it again. So we know that Jesus, Messiah, actually he would have these fringes, either on the cloth or his clothes would have the fringes, and he would have this color blue on. It had not been known, but the flag of Israel is kind of like something he would wear. Interesting. This was the beginning of a nation by faith. They had no nation, but 50 years before, they came up with a national anthem that we just sang. A national anthem, no nation. It's kind of like the Lord says, you believe before it happens. It was all in faith. The Herzl labored so hard that around the turn of the century, he died at age 44. But he had made a prophecy. He said, when he was in his journal of the Congress that he started, he said, it will happen. He said, it will happen. No matter what, whether, he said, in 50 years, it'll happen. 50 years after he wrote that was 1947. The year that the United Nations would vote Israel into existence. But the dream was still impossible. There were Jewish people returning to a desert and struggling to make it work, but it was still impossible. The land was in the hands of the Turkish Empire. The Turkish Empire had held it for 400 years. 400 years, and they were Muslim. And they were not about to give up any land. But then something happened. Something happened that there was an assassination in Central Europe of royalty, and the First World War broke out over the earth. And the Turkish Empire happened to enter the war on the side of Germany and against the British Empire. Years before, there was a little English boy who was taught to pray by his mother, and to always end the prayers at night with this prayer. And Lord, restore your ancient people, Israel, back to their homeland. Now, we go back to World War I. There was a great military general. You probably heard of him. His name was General Allenby. In the last part of the war, the latter part of the war, the Turkish Empire, after 400 years, began to crumble. And the one put in charge of the British forces in that area, to the land of what was called Palestine, happened to be General Allenby. It was called Palestine by the Romans. And you know why? Because it was named after the Philistines. The Romans said, we don't want the memory of Israel to be in the world anymore. So we're going to change the name of the land so people will forget. We called it Palestina, the land of the Philistines, not the Jewish people. So that's why, whenever you say Palestine, you're speaking ultimately of the Philistines. Allenby headed to what was then Palestine, carried with him a Bible, and used it in his strategy, in his military strategy. He would read the Bible. As he neared the land, the fighters, the Ottoman Turks and the Arabs fled from him. And it said they had mistakenly taken his name wrong. His name is Allenby, but they heard it as Allah Nabi, which means the prophet of Allah. And so they heard the rumors were the prophet of Allah was coming to bring judgment. So they fled. Allenby came to Jerusalem. He got off his horse before entering the gates, and he said, and he walked into the gates. You can still be there. I believe it was the Jaffa gate where he walked. And he said he got off his gate. He said because he would not enter Jerusalem on a horse when the Lord entered on a donkey. Allenby, General Allenby, who conquered the land or set it free from the Turkish Ottoman Empire for the British Empire, was the little boy who was taught to pray every night, Lord, restore your ancient land to your ancient people. He prayed that, and then God used him to fulfill that prayer. It just so happened that as